With such a vast array of retirement investment options, wouldn't it be nice if someone just pared it down to a few choices for you? Well, that's exactly what I've done today. So stick around and see my top 5 picks for beginner investors. Before I get into my 5 picks, I want to explain what my qualifications were in choosing these 5 investment options. There were 3 requirements that I looked for. First, the fund had to be at least 10 years old. When you're investing for the long term, it's important to be able to analyze the historical history of the funds that you're investing in. For the 5 funds that I chose, the youngest one is 10 years old, with the next youngest being 27. For those of you who don't know, I've set a financial goal of becoming financially independent in the next 10 years or by 2030. So for me, I'm looking for funds that have performed well for at least over the last 10 years. For many others of you who are in your 20s or even those in your 30s who are not looking to retire till you're maybe 65 or so, then it's even more important that your funds have a significant historical history, because you need to know that they are in this for the long haul and are capable of producing positive results over periods of decades. The second qualification that the funds had to meet was that there had to be a minimum $0 investment. I wanted to make sure that these funds were accessible to anybody and everybody who wanted access to them. For many of the funds that I looked at, there were $2,500, $5,000, even $250,000 minimum investments. And the reality is that's just not realistic for most people. One of the main values that I want to bring to this channel is being able to provide information and resources that are accessible to anyone who wants to take advantage of them. So this was a really, really important qualification that I had for the funds that I was going to recommend to you. The third and final qualification for a fund to make the cut was that the lifetime performance of that fund had to outpace the S&P 500 index. The S&P 500 is over 90 years old and has averaged about 9.8% over its lifetime. So that means that all 5 of the funds that I'm going to be recommending today have done at least as good or better than 9.8% over the life of that fund. While I did go through a lot of research and a lot of time to put together this list for you, I want to make sure to make the disclaimer that I'm not a financial advisor and this is simply for educational purposes. It's very important that you do your own research and understand what investments you are getting into for your own financial future. Simply use this as a guide and then take the time to go look into these funds yourself, as well as compare and contrast them with other funds that you may be familiar with. Coming in at number 1 is the Fidelity OTC Portfolio, also known as FOCPX. Fidelity OTC Portfolio is a large growth mutual fund that is almost 36 years old. Over 52% of this fund is invested in the giants like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Tesla, Nvidia, and Starbucks. While this fund does come in at our highest expense ratio of 0.87%, it more than compensates for it in its performance. Taking a look at the 1-year, 5-year, 10-year, and lifetime performance of this fund, we'll see that FOCPX has returned 44.6%, 22.16%, 19.64%, and 14.6% respectively. Honestly, I was pretty excited to see this fund make the top 5 list, let alone number 1. This does happen to be one of the funds that I personally invest in. And I'll be honest, I hadn't done the extensive amount of research that I did for this video before investing in this fund. So that was a pleasant surprise that came across my table. Coming in at number 2 is the Vanguard S&P 500 Index Fund, also known as VOO. VOO is a large blend equity ETF and the baby of our bunch at 10 years old. 27% of this fund is invested in tech companies, with the top 3 investments in Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft. Looking at VOO's performance, we see that this fund returned 15.09% over the last year, 14.11% over 5 years, 13.7% over 10 years, and 14.13% over the life of the fund. Remember though, VOO is just over 10 years old, so that life number isn't as significant as FOCPX, who has been able to produce its 14.6% for the last 36 years. Coming in at the middle of the pack is the Fidelity Blue Chip Growth Fund, also known as FBGRX. FBGRX is a large growth mutual fund that is 33 years old. 47% of this fund is invested in the big giants like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Nvidia, Tesla, Salesforce.com, and Visa. Looking at this fund's performance, we see that it did really well over the last year, returning 58.66%, 23.19% over the last 5 years, 19.37% over the last 10 years, and 13.07% over the life of this fund. Coming in at number 4 is the Fidelity 500 Index Fund, also known as FXAIX. This fund is a large blend fund that is 32 years old and has 27% of the fund invested in the big giants like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Berkshire Hathaway, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, and Visa. Looking at the performance of the Fidelity Index, we see that it returned 17.44% over 1 year, 13.98% over 5 years, 14.18% over 10 years, and 10.63% over the life of the fund. And finishing us off at number 5 is the Fidelity Select and Aerospace Portfolio, also known as FSDAX. This is an industrials fund that's 36 years old and has 72% of the fund invested in companies that engage in the research, manufacturing, or sale of products and services related to defense or aerospace industries. When we look at the performance of this fund, we see that it hasn't fared too well in the past year, coming in at negative 14.32%. However, if we keep looking at the rest of the historical performance, we see that this fund has brought in 11.34% over the last 5 years, 13.25% over 10 years, and 11.42% over the life of the fund. One of the things that is important to note, as you will see, FSDAX has a higher lifetime return than FXAIX. The reason that I still put FXAIX at number 4 and FSDAX at number 5 is because of the rocky performance of this fund over the last year. For some beginner investors, it could seem scary to invest in a fund that has had a negative 14% return over the course of a year. However, I didn't want to leave it off the list because one of the things that's important to understand about investing is that when investments are down, that means they're on sale. And considering that this fund is 36 years old and has averaged over 11% over its lifetime, then there's a very good chance that this fund is going to rebound and start doing well again. Which means that if you are willing to take advantage of this opportunity, then you would be buying this particular fund heavily discounted, which could be very beneficial for you. So with all of that said, I wanted to leave it on the list, but I did move it down to number 5 for that purpose. If you made it this far, I wanted to give you an honorary mention. This fund also has outpaced the S&P 500 over its lifetime, and so I wanted to include it in the list as well. It is the SPDR S&P 500 ETF Trust, also known as SPY. This fund is a large blend equity ETF that is 27 years old. 27% of this fund is invested in the big giants like Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Berkshire Hathaway, Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan Chase, and Visa. Looking to the performance of this fund, we see that it has returned 17.28% over the last year, 13.83% over 5 years, 14.05% over 10 years, and 9.93% over the life of the fund. So there you have it. Those are 5 funds and 1 honorary mention that I believe would be great options for beginner investors, or honestly, anyone in general, especially if you are participating in the buy and hold strategy and saving for retirement that is at least 10 years or more down the road. Then these are going to be some great investment options to consider adding to your portfolio. I hope this video has been informative and helpful for you. If you are investing right now and your fund wasn't listed here, please drop it in the comments below so that we can all share with each other what we're investing in and what's helping us get to our financial independence number. Thanks again so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next Monday.